It is really a pleasure to welcome today to the program TM Garret, who's a former white supremacist turned human rights activist. TM, such a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having me.
So, let's go to the beginning. You started sort of getting pulled into extremist and nationalist groups when you were quite young. I think it was when you were 13. What was initially appealing about those groups?
It wasn't actually the groups first. I grew up in a troubled family, dysfunctional, and I was a bullied kid. There was a lot of things that I didn't understand why other kids wouldn't play with me, and I was craving for a lot of attention, and I didn't get that attention. I always felt like my wishes and my talents that were overlooked. My mom tried hard. She had a drinking problem, but she hid it very well. I never starved. I always had good school supplies, and it was always so important to her that I have good grades in school. So what I really wanted was overlooked. And since I didn't get the attention that I wanted, one time I found the one thing that would give me the attention. It started with racist jokes at the schoolyard when I was about 13, 14, 13, high school age. And a lot of kids did that, but the other kids went back to normal. The big problem was my normal would have been the bullied kid that you can push around. And for nothing in the world, I would have exchanged it again. So I ran longer with those jokes, those racist, anti-Semitic jokes and everything than the other kids because I didn't have anything. And I was labeled as a Nazi kid at school. And I didn't like that first, but it had a side effect. I wasn't bullied anymore. And that was the point, why I ran with it. And then it started with hate music. It was the late 80s, 89, and a kid handed me the tape. And first it was not the real hardcore stuff. It was skinhead music, patriotic, and they were singing about how misunderstood they were, and people would call them Nazis, but they were not, and they were afraid of immigration. And I grew up in that little town, 500 citizens. There were no immigrants. There were nothing. It was just 500 conservative people living there, and that's all I knew. And for the first time when I heard that music, I thought somebody is listening to me. Somebody knows me without knowing me. And that was just amazing to me at that point. And with every cassette tape I got, the music got more radical. And that radicalized me too. Until to a point when I went and actively looked for skinhead groups. And I found one and joined that group and went from there.
And when you joined the group, how old are you, first of all?
That was about the age of 15.
Okay. And when you go to that group, are most of the people in the group 15, or are they older, significantly older than you were at the
I
time?
was I was pretty much the youngest. They were all about 17, 18, 19. The oldest was about 20. And pretty much all of them at that time, it was a lot more about subculture at that time. Went back to normal, to their normal when they were like 21, 22, 23. It was like the punks. They would get back to normal too. But in that case, there was often that extremist right wing ideology in the background too. So when they went back to their normal, in their minds, they were still extremists, which I didn't understand back then too. Um, but it was not a gang like you would imagine here in the U.S. It was overseas in Germany, and all of them either went to school or had jobs, and there was no drug selling or anything. And but it was still the music, and there was fights, and we got drunk and everything that was appealing to me. And then the music, and it got more radical. And first, it was just about being proud to be a German, and at some point, it was about foreigners out and Sieg Heil, and that radicalized me over the years.
And when it comes to the rhetoric becoming real world action, how much were the people you were around going beyond just the rhetoric and the music and doing things to other people, or like in the real world, as we might say?
Well, it started actually when I joined the first group because the music promoted that violence against anybody. We got drunk, hammered, and were actively looking for fights. And I was at the time, I was 15, I was more a shy kid. So I didn't get very much along with that. I liked the music, but I didn't like to transfer that in the real world. And every time we got in fights, I tried to be in the background,
Hmm.
which didn't earn me the best reputation at the time. But I remember the leader of that skinhead crew. I remember one time one guy was saying, "Well, your skinhead career will either end in prison or in a wheelchair," and that was very describing. I remember that very well because if we didn't find any other gang that we could fight, or if we didn't find one of our enemies we could fight,
Hmm.
well, you would just pick somebody amongst your own people just to fight. And that was in the days when I was a skinhead. And at the age of 17, I joined a far right party in Germany. And that's when the nationalist thought came more into the game.
Can you talk a little bit about how sincere you and the other people in the groups were about the beliefs? And I'll give you a little more context so that I'm clear about the question. When I've spoken to other former KKK people, former white nationalists here in the United States, they would very often say that they were sort of going along for the ride with the beliefs. Like they didn't really literally believe the anti-Semitic stuff that was circulating. They sort of believed it. It wasn't the most important thing, but the community was the most important thing. And they often talk about sort of this neglected childhood that you also talk about. In your case, how sincere were your extremist beliefs? And do you think the others in the group shared those?
Well, it started with that craving for belonging, for a family, for a purpose. That is why I joined the first skinhead group.
Yeah.
And I looked for an identity because I didn't have one. Like other kids, they had an identity as a Boy Scout. They had an identity, I don't know, fans of a certain sports team or whatever. The dads would take them to the games or watch the games on TV. I didn't have a dad. He died when I was young. My mother never remarried. So that was missing. So I looked for that family, of course. And when I radicalized and I joined that far right party, and later, I got more in touch with white supremacists worldwide through the internet. That was in the year 1998, roundabout. And I radicalized more and more. And I was hardcore as it can get. I believed that. I believed that the Jews were taking over the world. I really believed that the race war would start anytime soon. We were waking up already, had nightmares that the police would come, kick in our doors with a search warrant and stuff like that. And the others in the group believed that too. Of course, there were a couple that were more along for the ride. But I became one of the leaders and influencers. And I lived it. I was breathing it. I was waking up with it. I was going to bed with it. And it was exhausting.
Can you talk about what you imagined you would eventually accomplish by your membership in these groups and to this ideology? In other words, the ideology was the basis, but what did you see as the end goal? Was it the extermination of certain peoples? Was it, I mean, what did you think you would be able to do?
Well, that depended on which group I belonged to. When I started being in those skinhead groups, the skinheads always looked at themselves as the stormtroopers. Like in the Third Reich, you had the SS and the party and the leadership, and you had the fighting troops, and that's how we saw ourselves.
Hmm.
So we're trying to achieve that, and we're hoping that there would be a Fourth Reich without foreigners, without Jews, hanging the traitors. That's kind of what we believed in. And that got radicalized a little bit more, like the methods, how we want to reach it. First, it was that stormtrooper type thing. Then it was in that far right party, okay, we can reach it through elections, like actually what Hitler did. He got elected and then took over power and changed the laws. He thought we can do that. And then with the opening of the internet in 1998, and I became more concerned about the white race than just the nation I lived in. I thought we just have to unite it as white people, and especially in Europe. And I don't know how I tried to achieve that at that point. It was a period of 2 years. I really wasn't sure. And then I joined the KKK. And that was a weird thing because in Germany, the extremist far right is not based on a Christian belief system like it is here in the US, or often, not always. It's more based on the Germanic, Nordic, pagan belief system they have. And then you have the clan praying to Jesus, who was a Jew, and you can turn it and twist it and whatever. He was a Jew.
Yeah.
And I couldn't wrap my head around that. So I started studying scriptures, trying to find those famous translation errors and everything. And then looking back, we had that idea of the influential KKK that has governors, that has judges, that has police officers, secret knowledge maybe. It's the elite. I didn't think of any trailer park trash or anything at the time. I just looked, what did you read in books maybe, or old movies. And I thought, this is how we could do it. We could infiltrate society and reach our goals that way.
Can you talk a little bit about what started your, I guess we would call it like de-radicalization process? Was it some of these contradictions that you started to identify, or what triggered you starting to question what you were doing?
Well, it happened on my journey through all those groups. I always had questions, and I think every person that is in any kind of extremist group, that doesn't even have to be a white supremacist hate group, it can be any kind of extremist group, has the same questions and the same doubts. You know, if you have doubts, you live in a bubble. You don't talk to anybody outside of that bubble. You take your doubts, put it on a stack, that stack gets bigger, bigger, bigger until it's a mountain. And you know, the people in the bubble, they don't want you to leave. They reassure you everything is all right. They will tell you everything is fine.
Okay, we seem to have lost our connection to T.M. Garret, former white supremacist turned human rights activist. Fascinating conversation for as long as it lasted. I don't know what happened in terms of his connection, but we will. I would like to continue talking with him. Maybe we will have him back on. I guess we will go to a break and then continue with more of the program coming up after this. T.M. Garret, former white supremacist, now a human rights activist, and maybe next time we can learn more about the human rights activist work.